All right, let's go into this now. So Bernie recently, not recently, he endorsed Biden from the beginning, right? And he was asked, why isn't he endorsing his friend Cornel West, who supported Bernie's campaign every step of the way? So you'd think that Bernie would want to return the favor to his good friend Cornel West, but no. He said that we need to get behind Biden. We need to back Biden. We need to protect democracy, which, Bernie, bro, they literally rigged 2 primaries against you. The DNC collaborated, and big money especially collaborated, and even more so than that, the American news media collaborated to bash you and destroy your campaign and make sure that the American people don't even get a little bit of socialism, make sure they don't even get health care, right? You're really going to come out here and say that we have a democracy under Joe Biden and that we need to vote for Joe Biden to protect democracy. Buddy, they're already rigging the elections. They rigged 2 elections against you. So now it's time to be strong. It's time to be a man and stand up and say, vote for Cornel West, because this 2-party duopoly is just going to rig elections against us on behalf of the ruling class, on behalf of the economic elites, on behalf of the shareholders on Wall Street and the finance capitalists. And you need to vote for Cornel West so that the third party candidacy can gain some steam and can start eventually getting federal funding and can eventually get on the debate stage and can spread socialist ideas far and wide and point out that this country isn't a democracy, that 93% of elections in this country are determined by the candidate who raises the most money, that the media is so propagandistic and so consolidated into the hands of the finance capitalists and the ruling elites that it would make any so-called dictatorship that the U.S. has targeted look good, right? The U.S. media is the most propagandistic media in the world. So we don't have democracy. And the idea that we need to vote for Joe Biden, who was part of rigging the election against Bernie and who's sending all our tax dollars to fascists in Ukraine, the idea that we need to vote for him to save democracy and fight fascism is really, really ridiculous. And I ain't going to do it. I'm voting for Cornel West. I know a whole lot of people in my audience are with me because we've put our effort in. I literally put all the effort I could into that Bernie campaign in 2020. I truly believed that Bernie was going to give us a political revolution, and we were going to deal a huge blow to the corrupt elites and the establishment. And then, it fizzled out. Bernie completely cucked himself to Biden, endorsed Biden, told everybody to support Biden. And, then we came to find out that the DNC had been collaborating against us, and that of course, and we knew the whole time that the corporate media was collaborating against us. So after that, after I tried putting all my effort into changing the Democratic Party or having a revolution in the Democratic Party and it didn't work, like, okay, we got to change tactics, right? The Democratic Party never called itself a socialist party. They're pretty honest that they're a party of the bourgeoisie. They're a party of the ruling elites. They're economic donors. So why are we as socialists, we as people trying to organize the working class, confining ourselves to working within the Democratic Party, right? We need to work outside of the Democratic Party and get to the people, get to the masses, which is what Cornel West is trying to do, which is why Bernie Sanders should be a man and stand up and endorse his campaign, even if he doesn't think it's going to win, right? Even if he's not going to beat Biden and Trump. But still do it because it'll allow us to share socialist ideas to the working masses and get in their heads the idea of working outside the 2-party duopoly and actually advancing class struggle in this country, which is what matters. The Democrats beating the Republicans doesn't matter. Your life is going to be the same regardless for the most part. Advancing class struggle is what gets gains for workers, and that's what Cornel West is trying to do. So enough of me rambling. Let's get into this video from Good Politic Guy. Bernie and Cornel West spar over Biden's 2024 run.
All right. So Senator Bernard Sanders and Dr. Cornel West, 2 men who honestly have... have a great deal of influence over the development of my own politics and obviously awakening a lot of American people to the injustices of the U.S. political and economic systems, have sort of been going at it over the last couple of days, with Cornel West obviously launching his third-party bid with the Green Party to challenge Joe Biden and potentially Donald Trump at the Republican Party. And obviously him and Bernie Sanders are sort of fighting over Bernie's recent endorsement and early endorsement of President Joe Biden. So I just want to go ahead and hop in here with Bernie Sanders sitting down with CNN's Dana Bash to sort of respond to some of Cornel West comments, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on this entire situation. So let's go ahead and watch this.
There's Cornel West, who is a close ally of yours. He is running a third-party campaign for president. He recently criticized you for endorsing President Biden's reelection. Listen to what he said.
He says Cornel West is a close ally of Bernie's. That's what makes me so mad. Because Cornel West, even though he had disagreements with Bernie, he backed his campaign every step of the way because he recognized it as the best campaign at the time. Right. And he didn't run for president that year because he recognized that we had an actual Democratic Socialist running within the Democratic Party. And that was okay that year. But that failed. Now it's time to move outside of the duopoly, Bernie.
I love the brother. And you know, even in love, people have deep disagreements about these things. But I think, again, he's fearful of the neo-fascism of Trump. People look at Biden. They don't really want to tell the full truth. He's created the best economy that we can get. Is this the best that we can get? You're going to tell that lie to the people just for Biden to win?
What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is...
You want to know my reaction? Based.
So certainly it's not the best economy that we can create. That was what my speech was about yesterday. We've got to join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all. We've got to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half. We've got to raise the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. We've got to build the affordable housing we desperately need. But where I disagree with my...
We got to nationalize the entire healthcare industry. We have to seize the means of production for the working mass. We have to take political power for the proletariat.
My good friend, Cornel West, is I think in these really very difficult times where there is a real question whether democracy is going to remain in the United States of America. You know,
remain. Will democracy remain? What democracy, bruh? Do you forget the presidential debates when they asked all the other Democratic candidates, all the other corrupt candidates, like, oh, you know, we recently saw you with your cat Fluffy. That was very cute. What does family mean to you? What does your cat Fluffy mean to you? Throwing them the biggest softball questions. Then they would get to Bernie. And they'd be like, so you want to implement Medicare for all? This sounds a lot like Fidel Castro's Cuba. Do you want to start murdering American citizens in Central Park because you're an evil communist? They did everything they could to spin Bernie like he was this evil, authoritarian, communist warlord, you know, coming for the American people, just because he wanted to give us freaking health care. Just because he wanted to implement Medicare for all, which is a half measure, a policy that the rest of the industrialized world already has. Right? For that, they demonized him and treated him like he was evil and tried to turn the entire country against him. And even that wasn't enough because the DNC had to collaborate to rig the election against him. Right? But we have a democracy. We have a democracy when you can't even fight for very basic things like healthcare without the entire establishment and all their money and all their power descending upon you to crush you. It's not a democracy. And they apparently, Bernie, they were successful in crushing you. Because look at you now, simping for this neoliberal party of warmongers that is the Democratic Party. Instead of standing up for your friend and a real fighter for the people, someone who isn't broken by the neoliberal establishment, Cornel West. And it's interesting. Cornel West says what we need in America are people who are fortified, right? People who are actually willing to fight for socialism, to fight for the people, to fight for justice in the long term, right? He doesn't want people who are in and out, right? They get excited about politics, they help for a little bit, and then they never think about it again. Right? Or he doesn't want people who can have their backs broken by the neoliberals, who get attacked by the neoliberals and all of a sudden say, I'm sorry. Vote Democrat, like Bernie's doing right now. Be a fighter. Don't be a wimp like this. Learn from Bernie's mistakes.
Donald Trump is not somebody who believes in democracy, whether women are going to be able to continue to control their own bodies, whether we have social justice in America, we end bigotry. Around that, I think we've got to bring the entire progressive.
How is Biden going to end bigotry? There was literally a school shooting by a ethno-nationalist that happened last year who had been directly inspired by the Azov battalion and by the Biden-funded neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Right? You're not going to end bigotry until you get rid of class exploitation. And, also we could get into Biden's personal life if you want. He gave the eulogy at Strom Thurmond's funeral. He was best buddies with a literal segregationist. Watch Biden talking about the 3 strike laws and harsher prison sentences for nonviolent drug offenders in the early 2000s. That dude Biden was one of the architects of the drug war. He wasn't just complicit in it. He helped write the freaking crime bill. There's so many black Americans who are sitting in a jail cell right now for a nonviolent drug offense because of Joe Biden, while Joe Biden's son has been running around smoking crack and collecting money from all these firms that he gets to sit on the board of because he's Joe Biden's son. But that guy's going to end racism? Like, get out of here. You know this isn't true, Bernie. You're not this stupid. You're just cucked by the Democrats, and it's the saddest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Community to defeat Trump or whoever the Republican nominee will be, support Biden, but at the same time, which is what I did yesterday, is demand that the Democratic Party, not just Biden, have the guts to take on corporate greed and the massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we see today.
Okay, so we're going to get to another Cornel West.
I kind of like this guy. I'm interested to see what he has to say.
Follow up here when he went over on The Rising to basically respond to this Bernie Sanders segment. But I mean, so far, basically my take on this is that, am I surprised that Bernie Sanders chose to endorse Joe Biden, or am I surprised that Bernie Sanders chose not to endorse Cornel West with a third-party Green Party bid? No, absolutely not. I mean, Bernie Sanders, obviously, he campaigned for Hillary Clinton after he lost the 2016 Democratic primary. He campaigned for Joe Biden after losing the 2020 Democratic primary. I mean, as far as I know, he hasn't ever, endorsed a Green Party or a third-party candidate over the Democrat.
I mean, Cornel West wanted Bernie to run third party in 2020. When Bernie, endorsed Biden, Cornel West was like, what are you doing? You have all this momentum. And I believe he said this. I was less involved in 2016 than I was in 2020. Directly involved with the campaign and just paying attention. I liked Bernie in 2016, but I was still in high school. I voted for him for sure, and voted for him in the Wisconsin primary. But regardless, Cornel West wanted him to run third party, right? He was saying, you have all these people backing you, right? You have all these people who are demanding a political revolution. If a third party gets 5% of the vote, they get federal funding. And if they get 15% or whatever, they're on the debate stage. Use your giant base of support to do that, to fight for something new, to deal a huge blow to the duopoly. But Bernie didn't have it in him. He didn't have it in him. As we're seeing now, he's, at the end of the day, he's a Democrat, not a real socialist. He ain't a Lenin or even a Corbyn.
Nominee. So it's not really surprising in that sense, but I'll get to my take in terms of how Bernie Sanders has acted towards like Marianne Williamson, for example, who is running in the Democratic primary here in a second. But first, let's just go ahead and check in with Cornel West on what exactly his thoughts are on Bernie Sanders' statement there.
Well, no, I think that Brother Bernie's being consistent. He said that all along, and I can understand the argument. I think it's a plausible argument. I just don't think it's a persuasive one. I think that the argument he's making means that there's never any possibility for breaking from the corporate duopoly. There's never any possibility of trying to speak to the needs of poor and working people. I'm fresh from Mississippi, as you all probably know, there in Rankin County with Brother Jenkins and Brother Parker. I was there, the precious mother of Jenkins, Mary, and those lawyers down there, Brother Malik and Brother Trent. They are dealing with issues that the Democratic Party won't touch, which is issues of poverty and intense police brutality. And we haven't even got to the military adventurism abroad. So I think in many ways, Brother Bernie's making a plausible argument, but I think deep down in his heart, he knows that the Democratic Party has no fundamental intention of speaking to the needs of poor people and working people. They are dominated by the corporate wing. They're dominated by the militarists when it comes to foreign policy, and that he and AOC and the others are going to be, in a certain sense, window dressing at worst and at best people to appeal to every 4 years, but the Democratic Party is beyond redemption at this point.
Based? Man. I was going to say, I don't really even agree with him that Bernie's making a plausible argument because, you know, Bernie himself has been screwed by the undemocratic nature of our system and by the bourgeoisie and by the Democratic Party directly. So it's not that plausible. I thought Cornel was going a little soft on it, but then he really gets to the heart of it, right? AOC and Bernie Sanders have become nothing but window dressing for the imperialists, for the imperialist Democratic Party. So they can say, look, we have diversity of thought. We have socialists in our party. When those socialists, they won't do force the vote because they're too afraid of offending Nancy Pelosi and the other Democratic establishment figures. They won't endorse a third party candidate. They won't do anything to rock the boat. They won't go against the funding of the proxy war in Ukraine, right? When it comes to things that the establishment really wants, that the ruling class really wants, and that the Democratic Party wants, they side with the Democratic Party every time, right? So what are they then other than a distraction, other than window dressing for the Democratic Party? It's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so I mean, again, you know, I think honestly both of them are right in different ways. I think that Bernie is right in the sense that if Joe Biden was the only Democratic potential option for 2024, then it would make sense to sort of, especially if you live in a swing state or some important key state in the next election, to rally behind him. I sort of understand the argument that he is going for there because, you know, I think Bernie understands, I think Cornel West understands that Cornel West is not going to like outright win the 2024, you know, presidential election. Obviously, there is that goal of getting him to a 5% threshold so you can get that additional federal funding. And I think that is totally a legitimate and ambitious goal to get to in terms of supporting the third party ambitions in the United States. Obviously, I am not a supporter of either political party. I do think that we need more options here in the United States. Part of the issue with that is that we don't have things like ranked choice voting. We don't really have a legitimate potential for a third party to win at the national level. So I do understand sort of that aspect of it. But then I also understand Cornel West's argument here, which is that, yeah, of course, Bernie Sanders can go out there and sort of do his stump speech and, you know, reference things like universal health care. And now I guess he's bumped up from a $15 to a $17 per hour minimum wage in the United States of America. But at the same time, it's like Joe Biden, you know, the Democratic Party broadly, they're not fighting for those things. I mean, Joe Biden ran in 2020 on the, you know, public option, and he hasn't even mentioned that a single goddamn time since he's been elected as the president. So obviously,
dude, it's so bad. He won't even bring up the public option anymore. Like, come on. Come on, they won't even bring up the healthcare policy that was thought up by Mitt Romney in a think tank. Like, they won't even bring up the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act isn't even close to enough to changing our healthcare system and reforming our healthcare system and making it better. Medicare for All isn't even enough. That's still a half measure in and of itself. But we can't, not only can we not get Biden to fight for Medicare for all, can't even get him to fight for that, Obamacare. Like, bruh, I'm not voting for these people. I'm not supporting these people. I'm supporting the other socialist in the election who's going to spread socialist ideas about how to fix this country and fix the downtrodden state of the American working class. I'm backing Cornel West. Screw Joe Biden. He hasn't done anything to earn our vote. Enough of this. Enough of this. We need to vote for the people rigging democracy in order to save democracy.